Fault
Yep.
is blame, shame, or credit, right? You get credit if you did it, you get blamed, or you shame yourself if you didn't, because I'm at fault. Now, if you think about blame, shame, and credit, they're all oriented to the past. But responsibility is about the future. If I'm responsible, I'm not concerned with fault because I'm looking at whatever it's going to take to produce what I said I was going to produce. So now, what worked to get me here? What didn't work? And what was missing so I can see and start to assess what's wanted and needed. And in that case, I continue to act.
Welcome, badass entrepreneurs. It's time to hear the world's movers, shakers, and difference makers spill their secrets for unlimited success. So strap in, for Badass Entrepreneurs Only begins now. Welcome, badass entrepreneurs, to yet another episode of For Badass Entrepreneurs Only. As usual, if you're someone who just likes to put a toe in the water of life, this is definitely not the show for you. We get honest, we get serious, we get badass right away. And I am so unbelievably pleased to have Dan Tocchini on the show today. He is an expert in leadership, and leadership is what we're going to be talking about. So let me tell you this. Over the past 35 years, he has worked with executive teams from Virgin Hyperloop, ESPN, Microsoft, Impulse Space, and even nonprofits like Homeboy Industries. I love what he said. Dan transforms leadership into leadership. And there's no pixie dust, no potions, just courageous leaders and creative conflict resolution and relevant reconstruction. No conversation is too difficult for Dan, and no situation is too conflicted, because a leader with a vision cannot be held hostage by circumstance or history. I love it. Dan, welcome, welcome, welcome to For Badass Entrepreneurs Only.
Well, thanks, Dan, for having me. It's great to be here. Always enjoy talking with you. Thanks.
Yes, we have a bit of a history, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
So would it be okay if we just jump right into the middle of this?
Whatever you want to do.
Okay, so
I'm here. I'll follow you, man. I'm game.
all right. What is it? What is the big mistake that most leaders make that cause them the most problems?
I would probably, the biggest mistake is thinking, I don't know if it's a mistake, it's just a way of thinking. And I would probably, it's thinking I have to have all the answers as the leader.
It's really interesting. I was just talking with my exec this morning. She asked me something, and there was this flash, like being called up to the front of the classroom to do a book report that I haven't, studied for, right? It's funny that you said that. I didn't know what your answer was going to be. I wasn't expecting that, but I just had this immediate connection with that feeling.
It's an imposter stance, because I can't have all the answers. And
No.
why the hell do I have a team if I have to have all the answers? So the number one mistake I think leaders make is going in thinking they've got to have the answers. So they don't come in curious. They actually come in with an idea of what should happen, and that it's the right idea. And if somebody should challenge it, and then if you're in that stance, if you think you have to have the answers, you're going to get defensive when somebody in your team starts to question the validity, or at least looking for the holes that might be there in order to shore up the plan. Will feel like an assault, because if they find things that I hadn't thought of and I thought I had to have the answers, I'm going to get insecure about being a leader.
Right. And you just said something that I want to circle back to. You said if they don't show up curious, and that is a big, meaty thing. And I want to unpack that a little bit. Let's talk about showing up to a meeting curious.
Well, curious, it doesn't mean I don't have my point of view. It doesn't mean I don't have my agendas that I want to accomplish. It means that I'm curious about how they're going to be executed and what's it going to take to get the whole team aligned behind them. I'm curious about the holes that they may see, because we're talking about a team of experts or people who are hired because they have a competency I want to bring to the table and that supports the mission, and they see the mission as something that supports them. So we're really talking about people with like minds. And so if there's something they want to get done, I want to get done, and they might see other ways to get it done that may be more efficient, effective, optimal, that kind of thing, that I'd want to pay attention. And being curious is being curious about what's it going to take to have what I'm aiming at turn out. I don't go into the meeting like, oh, I wonder what I should do, curious about what I should do necessarily, unless I set the meeting up to talk about what should we do here, given the circumstances. I may want to get their points of view on it, but normally I'm coming in because I'm meeting with them because we're already on a mission. We're clear about what the outcomes are, and they may have plans that are different than what I thought of, and they also may see things I don't see. So curious about what's wanted and needed that I may not be on my radar.
Okay. And, you know, with your business, Take New Ground, which is how I found you, you know, I found your podcast. It was an amazing podcast. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But one of the things that I've heard you talk about is the curiosity of, well, how did I create this situation? And I think for a lot of people, that's really hard because it's so easy to point to the person on the team, right? Who's seemingly causing the problem, seemingly disruptive, right? And to say, I got to fix this person because that's the problem. How do you shift into thinking, well, maybe I'm contributing to this? Maybe, like, what's that like?
Yeah, what I ask is, how have you contributed to what you have, right?
Yeah.
Because if I have it, I find myself complaining about what I have, and it's chronic. Like, it's the same complaint I run over and over again. Well, that's a pretty big clue that I must have some contribution to it, because I'm at least not willing to have a new breakdown. I keep settling for the same breakdown. So there must be something I'm A, getting out of the breakdown, and B, if I could see what I was doing or how I was being in the situation that was contributing to it, I could shift it. So there are two things there. It's either I'm contributing, and then if it's chronic, I'm probably getting something out of it. So those are two things that I'd want to explore. As a CEO, I'd want to explore that for myself.
I like what you said about there's something I'm getting out of it, right? Which is that, you know, maybe I've seen this with leaders. They really love the fight, right? They like to get in there and, you know, say big things and get loud. And they may hire somebody beneath a level of their awareness who is argumentative, so they get to do that thing.
Well, it's interesting you brought that up, because one of the things I've been focusing on is the lost art and science of argumentation. Because most people, argumentation now has a bad rap, as if you ought not argue. But really, there are good arguments and there are bad arguments. Like, you know, there are arguments I ought not ever enter into. And then there are arguments I don't want to enter into that I ought to enter into because I'm going to inherit the outcome of that argument. There are some things to think about in arguing, but an argument is really a cooperative endeavor. In other words, you and I are arguing if we're on the same team because we're committed to the same outcome. But there's a controversy around how that outcome should be accomplished. And that's usually where the argument is, or whether or not that outcome is big enough, small enough, optimal enough, etc. But it's because we all care about the outcome, and we're arguing because we're trying to get into an alignment where we can count on each other for having that turn out. And that's a good argument.
So someone listening right now is thinking, okay, this makes sense. First of all, how do you tell a good argument from a bad argument? And how do you engage in an argument so it's beneficial?
That's a great question. There's quite a science behind it. In fact, I'm working on some content around this because I noticed a lot of the young teams I work with a lot of startups, is they're afraid to argue because they don't really know what it means. And so anytime I want to persuade you to do something, or to persuade you to a perspective that, or a certain way of doing something, then I've got to be able to first identify what both of us want to have turn out. And then I'm going to make certain claims. Now, when we talk about argument is really the study of effective reasoning, because you can't reason well unless you argue well. And what I mean is, certain things are provable. You don't argue that 2 and 2 is 4. And if somebody wants to argue about that, it's probably not worth arguing about, because 2 and 2 equal 4. And we built civilization on these premises. So that's not something I would argue about. But something that's not verifiable that way, not what you would call determined by science or by a very, mathematical outcome, or you can demonstrate it, right? if-then statements, etc. What do we got? Well, then argument is for a certain audience. So if I'm working with a team and we're having a difference, I'm going to argue to convince the team this is the way to go. And if somebody else is arguing otherwise, then it's a healthy exercise. And the argument is audience dependent. And it's got a certain aim or an outcome. Usually the audience has a stake in the argument. They care about what the arguers are talking about, whether it's written, whether it's an article, or it's a live conversation. People are persuaded toward an argument. And the way you persuade people is you make claims and then you back them up with reasons that seem logical or make sense to the audience.
Yeah.
And the argument that wins is the one that can make stake claims that persuade the audience that their reasoning is worth following.
Okay. And so let's say that someone is growing their business. They've hired 3 or 4 people, right? It's their first kind of step into leadership.
Right.
It's their first time leading for their company. Maybe they've done it for another company. What are the kinds of things they should be doing to set the groundwork to create a great team?
Well, I mean, you have to have a clear vision. That's the first one. Like, where are we going? What determines our success? How do we know if we've been successful? So they set out a set of results, if you will, that this is what we're aiming at. And we know that we're successful when these things occur. Okay. So that's one. The second thing is you want to get into a very authentic and sober relationship to where people are now, to current reality.
What does that mean?
Well, like if I say I want to go to Boston and I'm in San Francisco, but I think I'm in Seattle, then any effort I make to get to Boston is probably it's not going to work. I'm going to end up somewhere in Newfoundland or whatever on the East Coast. So knowing where you are is as important as knowing where you're going. And if I've got some flattering idea about where I'm at or some romantic sensation about what we can or can't do, then I'm going to probably be disappointed as I move down the path to get to where I want to go, because I'm going to go, well, we're not even close. And many leaders don't stop and say, wait a minute, where are we right now? What's actually working right now? What actually isn't working based on the outcomes, and what's missing? Because if I can identify what's missing, what's wanted and needed will naturally start to appear, and then I can move towards that.
What are the kinds of things you see missing?
It's a vast array. It could be usually, Harvard and Tufts Business School did a number of studies on what it is that foils teams, particularly in getting into alignment. And 87% of the breakdown is cognitive, how people think about what they're doing and what they're up to and who they are and what they're up to. So one thing I'm always looking at is, well, what are our intentions? What do we see based on result are people's intentions? So if I have an engineer who's committed to a certain outcome and deliverables that they've promised, and they promised it by a certain time, and I notice that this individual is off the clock or stops working or hasn't been delivering, along the way, that's a sign for me to get connected to where they are at, to support them in to understand what it's going to take to get to where they want to go. And do they see it? And are they up for it? What help do they need? If they need some, do they recognize it? If they don't, what's it going to take to open that up? Do they have the resources they need, et cetera, et cetera?
So how do you know as a leader whether you're perpetuating the problem or you just have a bad team member?
Well, it requires some engagement, right? Unfortunately, another breakdown that a lot of leaders have is they think because they hired somebody, they shouldn't have to engage them or work with them to get to where they wanted to go, what they're committed to do. I've heard somebody say, well, I'm not hired to be a babysitter. Well, that's true. But there might be some, you hire somebody and then you're a babysitter if you start to work with them. I mean, it's like jumping from one extreme to the other doesn't help. Well, wonder what's missing for them. Have I provided everything? Is there something else in the organization going on? Is there something they don't know they need to know? Have they been onboarded well? I mean, there's a million different things we could look into to make sure. And as we do, we start to narrow down what's missing, and that tells us. And if that is they've got an attitude that's not going to work, that'll show up. If it's a competency issue that they need some support on, that'll show up. If it's a resource issue, that'll show up in the inquiry that I have. And the idea is to be able to see it when it's small, because oftentimes leaders don't act on it till it's so blaring that they have to act on it. And then it may be too late to make the corrections, and they may lose people. Like if there's usually a big turnover, a high rate of turnover, there's a number of things you can check into, but a lot of it has to do with onboarding, resourcing the people when they come on, giving them the necessary support and coaching they need to win, making sure they're clear what win is. There's a number of things you can go on, you can check down to be sure they're in place. And along the way, as you're working with these people, their attitude's going to give you some clue. A lot of times, and as a leader myself, I've not had conversations I know need to be had because I don't want to bother with the upset or bother with the back and forth or bother with the possibility of losing this person and getting the work back in my lap. So I just prostitute myself out and moan and bitch and complain about what's not happening and what's wrong with this person, when I myself don't want to really have the hard conversations that are necessary to take action that's going to make a difference. And that's what I mean by calibrating the current reality, getting connected to what's really going on with me and my team, with the team and each other, et cetera, the people they're working with, like that.
That's so well said. There's so much I want to dive into, but you said something, and you guys say it a lot, I say it a lot, which is all the best conversations are the ones that you don't want to have. Right? That's where the freedom is. Like every Monday night, my wife and I sit down at the table and we have a list of questions that we ask and answer each other, because it just, and when we don't do that, we notice that our relationship starts to get really hard. It's a stopgap measure that we're having these little micro conversations, not even arguments, but just the conversations that are hard to have.
Yeah.
But they don't erupt. As you were talking, I was thinking about a client that I have. Very interesting, because she went from running a marketing company to now running a care home for elderly people. It's a residential home. So it's just like she bought a house, and the house is a really beautiful thing.
How many people does she have in there?
I think the maximum is like 8 or 10, right? Yeah. So it's a really beautiful environment. And her struggle, which I love talking to her about, because she's used to these people in the marketing business, right? Who are more a different skill set, different approach. And now she's hiring caregivers who have a different skill set and a different approach and a different communication style.
Yeah.
She's having a really hard time because the feedback that she's getting is she's hearing, you don't appreciate us, you think that we're stupid. And she's having a really hard time with that.
Has she asked them what it is that triggers that response for them?
Yeah, so that's the direction that we're moving in, to your point about, well, I'm not a babysitter and all that, or I shouldn't have to ask these questions. That's the hard thing, right? Because she was so good at this one thing, at being a leader in this other thing, and terrible at this. And when you were talking about the ego or, what people bring, I said to her, you're creating this problem and you have to start there. Because if you start there, then you can create the solution. But if it's all the other people, you're sunk.
Yeah, because you can't control them. And if one person calls you a jackass, not a problem. Let it roll off your back. If 2 call you a jackass, you might want to check the mirror. And if 3 call you a jackass, well, buy a saddle. You know what I mean?
It's true, but it's so tough, right? Because it seems like what we're saying, Dan, is that if there's a problem in your company, it's your fault, not your people. But fault is such a heavy word. And that's what she said. She's, oh, so this is my fault? It's going to a really edgy extreme about who's at fault.
Yeah, it's a paradigm. Fault is a paradigm. And people think when you talk about taking responsibility, the culture naturally has taught us to think that we're looking at to who's at fault, when it's actually 180 degrees different. When I'm taking responsibility, I'm clear. So fault, let's just start there. Fault is blame, shame, or credit, right? You get credit if you did it. You get blamed or you shame yourself if you didn't. And because I'm at fault. Now, if you think about blame, shame, and credit, they're all oriented to the past. They're justifications for the past, right? But responsibility is about the future. And the only reason I look at the past is to understand what was working, what was not working, and what was wanted and needed based on the future I said I'm committed to. So if I'm responsible, I'm not concerned with fault because I'm looking at whatever it's going to take to produce what I said I was going to produce. And at this moment, I don't have it. So now what worked to get me here? What didn't work? And what was missing so I can see and start to assess what's wanted and needed. And in that case, I continue to act. So it's always about bringing the future forth, not justifying the past. And that's a very powerful way to stand. And it takes discipline because we naturally want to blame ourselves just because in our culture, we're looking to pass the buck. And not just the culture, it's human nature. You go back to the very first man and woman. It's the woman you gave me.
I love that because we are biologically geared to be in defense of this ego structure.
Yeah.
Right. So when that starts to be encroached on, we start to feel like, this thing that I believe that I am is being dismantled. That's sort of a death that I have to protect myself from.
Well, yeah, it's very powerful. You just said it. It's like it's the distinction between perception and perspective. Perception is how I see the world. If I'm not willing to challenge my perception, then I will move into a prove and protect posture about the way I see the world. So anything that comes in, I'm about proving what I'm seeing versus questioning what I'm seeing. Perspective is about seeking other perspectives that are committed to the same thing and noticing what they're opening up that my perception keeps me from seeing. And that's the value of argumentation. Argumentation, when somebody makes a claim that's different than the claim I make, then I need to listen to their reasons, which could open up a possibility I never thought I couldn't see from my perception. Their perspective could open up a view I never even considered, and thus a resource I never knew I had. There's a lot in that.
You make me think about this scene from the movie Apollo 13, one of my favorite movies, because it's all about solutions, right?
Yeah.
And right after the explosion happens on the spaceship and at mission control, they're all firing at Gene about what the problems are. Yeah. And he stops and he says, let's take a look at this from status. What do we got on the ship that's good? And the thing that I love about that is because looking at the problems, I mean, it's how humans are geared, right? What's wrong and what's going to get worse? Yeah. But when we start to look at, okay, what do we got on the ship that's good? Like what's working? And saying, okay, this is what we have to work with. Let's focus on that and bring that forward rather than just looking at all the problems, which at the moment aren't solvable.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you were talking about in the beginning, right?
Yeah. Now, it's a powerful distinction, Dan, that you brought up, because anytime you make a shift, not only are you going to correct some things, but you're going to introduce new problems. And you're always introducing new problems. Any kind of shift introduces a new set of problems. So then the question comes up is, well, what problems are most important? Like, what problems ought I focus on and what problems ought I leave alone, right? And that just comes down to understanding there's only 3 problems that you can have. There's a normal problem, there's an abnormal problem, and there's a pathological problem. And the only way you can make those distinctions is to understand the context that you're in. So for instance, if you and I just started a business and the first few months or year or so, we had some cash flow problems. Well, that's a normal problem.
Yeah.
But if we've been in business for 5 years and we're constantly battling cash flow, that's an abnormal problem. And it could even be pathological. And probably that's a problem I'd want to look into quickly, right? Yeah. Like there's certain problems what problems do I focus on? Using that matrix is a very helpful way for me, at least I use it all the time, to say, okay, which problems should we focus our resources on resolving? Which one's going to move the ball down the field towards the mission the most? And that's one of the things that really helps.
Well said. And I want to shift to another kind of thread here. And that is that in your introduction, I was talking about some pretty well-known companies, Virgin Hyperloop, ESPN, Microsoft. Are they having problems that are very different than a problem that a startup might have or a smaller company might have, or is it similar?
They have similar problems and they have different problems. Similar problems are they certainly have problems with their people they're working with and missing, the mark and not being aligned and not getting the work done when they said they would, those kinds of problems, which are pretty normal. The abnormal problem for large companies like that is that they have so much money, they don't usually pay attention to the problems until they're eating their lunch, right? Until the
Interesting.
problem's gotten so big, they have to pay attention to it. Working with leadership teams, we work with them to spot problems when they're small, when they just start out. And we have a tendency to want to overlook those problems, but we can look and see where that problem's heading. And we can say, is this going to be is this a normal problem or is this abnormal? You can catch it when it's small and ask that question. So if you just hire somebody and they come in and they keep, every time you talk to them about making a correction, they tell you, well, they're new. And they do that for like more than a month. Well, then I naturally want to ask them, how long do you want to be new? Because that ain't going to work anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're here to get this done. What's it going to take? What's wanted and needed? Let's talk about, and that attitude of being new may be part of the breakdown. Maybe that's why they're afraid to act, because they think they're new and they don't want to make a mistake or they don't want to upset somebody or etc. And I've often heard that from people and said, well, what if we hired you to upset other people if they're not working, if it's not optimal? Let's get upset. Like, say what you need to say. Let's deal with it. There's no conversation too difficult. If you're committed to the mission, then the difficult conversations are going to make a difference because you're going to use them to find what's wanted and needed. And that takes some focus. It takes a maturity that many people don't like to embark upon because, let's face it, we all grow up thinking the world, at some level revolves around us. If that doesn't get addressed, it's a problem. I know one of my favorite quotes is, you become an adult after you have children, because that's when you discover very powerfully that the world doesn't revolve around us.
It's an easy thing to say, like, when my business grows and we make more money, I'll finally be able to hire some really great people, and then all these problems are going to go away.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's got to be something of a sugar crash, right? When somebody realizes that, wait a second, I'm still having the same problems.
Yeah. Well, we always say, who's the constant?
Yeah.
and the leader is the constant. The leader is the constant. The other thing we talk about is that the system that's in place, that, if there's a constant breakdown, it's chronic. Well, one of the things you got to come to terms with is the fact that the system that's been created is producing exactly what it was meant to produce. And that's a hard pill to swallow, because along the way, people are saying, well, we don't want that. We didn't want that. That's not really what we wanted. But if you keep getting what you say you don't want, then you might want to investigate how you might be settling for that in exchange for what you say you want. Because what you say you want is less predictable, is not something you've ever done before, is potentially vulnerable. It makes you vulnerable. There's a lot of payoffs in reproducing what you say you don't want. It's like I can't have that, but at least I have this. It's a real problem, man. Well, it's predictable. It's an interesting statistic. About 87% of all the kids that get abused will turn out to abuse somebody else, because it's really sad, but you become familiar with what you learn to stay alive in, and it's frightening if you're in new territory. You can't predict what's going to happen. It's frightening. It's like, okay, now what? I've got to stand and then see what comes up and deal with it in real time, rather than kind of be predisposed, where I just do the automatic thing and I don't have to think, or I don't have to be present to really find what's wanted and needed.
I appreciate this about what we say that we want and what we get and how we respond to that. Because a basic tenet of my life is, if you want to know what your intentions are, look at the results. That's what you wanted in some way. And someone might say, well, I didn't want to get into a car accident. It's not like a stated one thing. They got in their car, I can't wait to get into an accident. But hey, the accident might have prevented you from going to a meeting that you didn't want to go to. And so there's a subconscious level, there's something going on.
I do believe there are things that happen to us. We're victimized. There's no doubt that there are times when you're victimized. But the question then is, what are you going to do with it? For the most part, I believe that you had some contribution, and you want to pay attention to those things and see what can open up out of them. Because especially if it's reoccurring, it's something like, You get into a relationship, you've been in it for a few months, and then you start thinking, when's the other foot going to drop?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's one of the clues that there's probably something there you haven't considered that you're contributing that's greatly impacting the outcome to come out that way. Like if you've got a turnover rate that's high, and no matter who you hire, you tend to lose them. There's something you're contributing. I'll put my money on it. Something
Yeah.
you're contributing that's producing it. Otherwise, it wouldn't repeat itself over and over again. And you probably need some outside eyes to look at it freshly if you're willing to hear the feedback. That really involves an emotional maturity where you're not attaching your failures to your identity. If you can detach them from your identity, you can learn a lot faster. But if you think it's a statement about you, or you're doing this work to prove something to yourself or others about you, you're going to find yourself defending the things you say you don't want. And that's brutal.
I'm sure that you've seen people move from being not great leaders to being really good leaders.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, so what is that journey like? I mean, how do you go from being a not great leader and even identifying that way, going, I'm just not good at leadership, to becoming a really good leader? What's that journey?
We focus on three things, but the first thing we focus on is managing yourself, leading yourself, like dealing with, handling, directing your own internal state in a way that can impact others the way you say you're committed. So I may not like everybody I work with, but I can respect them. You know, I may not want to hang out with them every day, but I can respect and love them for what they contribute and how they contribute and how I can stand with them to have that happen, right? So getting a hold of the way I relate to people, managing my own internal state, and then I can start to manage my impact. If I do that well, other people will want to follow because they get that there's something bigger than me gratifying myself. And I'm going to want to connect with how the mission can serve them, because I know that people really, it's a paradox. People don't want to be led, but they need to be led in order to have it turn out. And people are willing to be led if they see what they're being led into is going to benefit them as well as how they're benefiting you, right? If they see that serving the mission is going to benefit them, they're going to be a different person at work than somebody who thinks they're just coming to work to do you a favor.
Yeah.
And a lot of leaders hire people and thinking they're doing them a favor rather than these people are going to get the benefit of working together to have this turn out because they can see directly how it's going to support them, how it's going to make their life worth living and exciting and give it some meaning and resource.
Yeah, it's easy to think as a new leader, okay, I'm paying someone, so they kind of owe me to do these things. And while, yeah, that's the deal, there's still a lot more going on. You know, how they feel about what they're doing, what their level of loyalty is based on if they feel like they're a part of something.
Yeah, people who get they're cared about, and I don't mean that in a cheesy, Hollywood way. I mean
Yeah.
that like they see, for instance, I have a guy on my team that I've stood for, and we've had some pretty intense conversations. And he's thanked me many times because he get that the conversation hasn't been necessarily about me or getting what I want, but about what are you really up to and how can we serve that and what's it going to take for you to succeed? Like hard on that, not on him, caring about him, but not getting off of what he came to get done. He's complimented me a couple of times about that and thanked me for the stand and taking the risks of maybe upsetting him with a very difficult conversation. We have a saying that goes, just say it, say what's there. Let's start there. Say how it's really there. Say what's there. Because you can say something to me and I can decide I'm going to contain it. Listen to it. I'm going to try to understand it. If I don't, I'm going to ask questions and we're going to find what's wanted and needed out of that discussion.
Yeah, my dad was a pretty tough guy, right? And he owned a couple really successful shoe stores in Chicago. And he was really friendly with his staff. And I said to him, it's nice that you're so friendly with them. And he said something, he said, first they have to be afraid of you, then you can be friends with them. And that really bothered me, right? But what I came to understand now that I'm a leader, right? Now that I have people working for me, is there's a certain level of respect that they have to have for the chain of command, right?
Most of the time, if you're paying them, you have the differential. That's a power differential.
Right. Yeah.
You run the, and that in itself is something to be aware of because many leaders don't recognize when they say something, how impactful it is because they are the one who has the power of the pen.
Or they're not being impactful because
Yeah,
I see it's the same mistake people make in sales. Like, well, I don't want to be pushy. So they're
yeah.
just ineffective. Same thing. Like, well, I've seen leadership in this way. I'm not going to do that, but there's really no strategy other than not doing something.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because sales is a perfect example of the power of
Yeah.
argument, right? Basically, you're arguing with people about what's valuable. And it requires, it introduces us to ethics because if you're going to try to persuade somebody towards something, there's certain ethics that you're either going to stand by or you're not. And
Mm,
one of them is certainly don't lie. And you don't need to power somebody or, try to overpower them or oppress them or manipulate them into it. Those are things that go along with argumentation that's workable, argumentation that makes a difference,
hmm
and welcoming other people and welcoming their point of view if they're involved. There are times when argumentation is simply one who's making a statement and answering questions and the other one questioning. I mean, a debate's like that, a political debate, or if sit down, you want to find out about something from an expert, people are going to fire questions at them, challenge them, etc. That's an appropriate argument. But generally, when there's a two-sided argument, it's in good faith. And if I can't hear what you have to say, if there is no willingness on your part to discuss either way like that, then there's no real argument. It's just now it's a bad argument because
Yeah.
people aren't willing to engage. And if they're not, it's not worth the effort. If they're not willing to engage and risk, because arguing is a risk. And the
hmm
risk is you got to be vulnerable to being persuaded. You might be persuaded
Mm,
out of your perspective. But most of all, like I said before, it's the art of mastering or perfecting reason. Because if we have a good argument, I'm going to get sharper on what it is I want. You're going to sharpen my argument because you're going to expose weaknesses I need to learn about, listen to, research about, and understand in a way that I can later on persuade, and I'll probably move in your direction,
mm.
that kind of thing. Or I'll add it to what I'm up to.
We're kind of back to curiosity. We're back to a sense of openness and wanting to create a shared vision. Right.
Yeah,
One of the things I found really interesting in this residential assisted living organization, because I've met a lot of people in it, is that they all have a belief that it's hard to find good people and it's hard to hold on to them. And they kept coming at me, and I would say, well, what if it wasn't? This is a construct that you have adopted.
I would go into it too as well. I wonder what you get out of thinking that. I mean,
Yeah.
it's obviously deeply embedded in you, and you're proving it to be true, which is the case of any bias.
hmm
So I wonder what you get from that. Like, what's the payoff? Because I've heard it too, but I work for a couple companies, and it's just the opposite experience. In fact, they're
hmm
turning people away. So
Right.
good people. It has a lot to do with the way somebody's relating to it. Be a good inquiry with that person. I wonder what the payoffs of having it that way are, and just live in that. Because usually, if you ask somebody, what do you think you're getting out of that? They're going to say, nothing. I don't want it to be that way.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And then it's a great question to say, do you notice that it's been that way? Yes, I do. So if you did want it to be that way, would you want to know? Given it's been like that for this long, and you say you don't want it that way, I wonder if you're willing to consider, just for this period of time,
hmm
how you might want it that way based on results and what you might be getting out of that.
And that is a very courageous thing to do, to ask, to be open to the question of how am I creating this situation that I believe I don't want?
Yes. Or how am I contributing it to it? You may not even be creating it.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Contributing,
But you're
definitely.
participating in a way that no
hmm
matter what happens, you seem to have this general same outcome.
Right.
Like same shit, different toilet, or same
Yeah.
toilet, different shit, however.
Look, if you're in a job and at the end of the day, you end up with a lot of bruises, you might want to check the job because there's a chance that you might be a boxer, right? And so you want to ask yourself, what is it that I'm contributing to this thing that I think I don't like?
That's right. And there's so many payoffs. They're both
Yeah.
psychological, physical, and relational. I mean, I'd cover all, like, what are the possible payoffs? That's part of what I developed our AI for, is to help people do that because it's private and they don't have to worry about anybody judging them for it.
Let's talk a little bit about that. This will be kind of a wrap-up conversation, but I really want to hear about this AI because it's fascinating.
Well, we've got this AI called Maven, and it's basically a number. We built it off of ChatGPT, but not in ChatGPT, and we use other bots in it. So it's very robust. I built our frameworks into it to help people challenge their ideas and to look at possibility they may not be considering, and then to provide game plans to go forward. It first asks you for the problem. You state the problem. It restates it to make sure it's got it the way you say it, that you agree. Then it's going to ask if you want to go deeper into the inquiry or if you want to go to a game plan. And we always say, go to the inquiry first. I go to the inquiry and I know what's coming. But considering the questions and what it comes up with as examples often are outside of anything I've considered, which, and some of them will ring a bell and other ones aren't relevant. But for the most part, I find 2 or 3 that are very relevant that I might not have thought about the way I'm relating to what's going on. And then when I go to the plan, I've got a broader view of what's possible when I make the plan, which influences the plan. And then I'm much more prepared to enact the plan. In fact, I'm usually, oh, good, I got a new idea. Let's get a plan. Let's go do it.
Yeah. And you mentioned this earlier, but dealing with AI, there's one sense where it sounds, wow, it's so impersonal, but there's a certain amount of freedom in that, as you said, you aren't creating a feeling of being judged by someone. If I'm sitting down with you and talking about my struggles in leadership, I might have a hard time because it's like, I just don't want to admit this to you. But if I'm talking to a machine, I don't care. It doesn't have a face. It's not
going to tell anybody. It's not.
Right, yeah. It doesn't have a judgment.
I can get a lot of my questions out, test them. So when I sit down with my team or somebody on the team, I'm pretty grounded in I can contain whatever conversation comes up because I'm more prepared than I would have been if I didn't test some of the questions, ideas, thoughts, etc.
How do you approach leadership in your own company and take new ground?
That's a question you should ask, Adrian or Chad. But I check in a lot.
Yeah.
There's not a conversation too difficult to have.
Yeah.
That's been tested over and over again. We listen pretty closely. We identify what's a good argument, what's a bad argument. We work a lot of distinctions, but I think the biggest thing is that we stand for each other. We're clear about why we're there. We're very clear. We onboard people in a way that they get clear quickly about what they're up to. When people realize that they can come, like we want to know what's not working. So if you bring something to the table that's not working, we want to know what it is or what you think is not working, then we can vet it and we want everybody's eyes on it. So what we work to do is to be hard on the problem and soft on the person. So we can get side by side with each other, not head to head, because we know we're all committed to the same mission. We just may have different ideas about how to get there. So it's worth hearing the mission and how they see it and how they think we ought to get there. A good leader knows when to follow. And I can tell you, every one of the people on our leadership team at some point or another has led the organization because they were on it in a way that the rest of us went, they've got it, we're going to follow them, which doesn't mean we don't challenge or offer what we have. It just means they're sniffing something. Let's true up to that. That they've got the music.
You, the person listening right now, might be thinking to yourself, oh, I would love to have that kind of thing in my organization. I just don't see it happening. Like I just don't have the right people, or I don't know. Like, what does it take to get there, Dan?
Look, you just get committed to it and you stand, and you don't find the right people. You actually make the right people.
Yeah.
Right? People want what I'm talking about. And like I said, if you want to know how the leadership is in my organization, ask Adrian, ask Chad, ask Kathleen, or Aaron or Elizabeth or Bethany. They'll tell you. And that's usually the best way to find out. Doing that, being able to stand with your people in a way that they feel like they can tell you anything at any time, brings a confidence to the team that is hard to describe. So if they want something like this, then they've got to stand for it themselves. They go be the person you want to be with the people around you. Oh, I can't do that. I'll get fired. Well, then you're going to live in an organization that prostitutes itself because
Right.
people are afraid to lose what they have. So they put up an imposter so they can get by and then wonder why they feel so alone. If you think you're really going to get fired, you might want to be looking for a new job, or at least test it. Find a new
Yeah.
job and test it, right? If that's the kind of oppressive leadership you're living under, you might want to consider how it is you set that up for yourself and why you would settle for it. And I'm sure you have a lot of great stories and reasons. And if that's the case, then you might as well enjoy it. If you're not willing to challenge those stories, then be grateful. You got what you
Mm.
want.
I always say that the problem that you can point to is never the problem.
No, that's right.
It's my boss, it's my spouse, it's my
Yeah.
circumstances. I have
It's
this birth defect, right? It's only an alibi for the conversation that you don't want to have, the exploration that you don't want to go on, the new ideas that you're afraid to expose.
Yeah. And we say the problem isn't the problem. The way you think about the problem is the problem.
And there's a million of those kinds of things. I call them,
Axioms,
right,
bumper
refrigerator
stickers
magnets, right, yeah, Instagram posts, but to actually live in them,
to
that's where the
execute it.
courage
Yeah,
is.
that's,
Yeah.
I'm with you because all this stuff's out there, but it's really, are you willing to execute it? We feel really good about what we're doing because our clients feel good about it and
Mhm.
they refer us. We're completely referred to
Mm.
by our clients and we get new clients that way. And most of our clients, they end up giving us stock in their company because we become such a
Wow.
partner with them. Yeah. Those are things that we look for, those kinds of results that tells us that our client is literally, they are getting such value that they want to keep us around. They want us to be invested in their outcome like that. It's like having kids, the biggest sign for me of success is that my children want to hang out with me. They want to share life with me. If they don't, then I miss the mark.
Well, if you want to learn more about Dan and really understand what they're about, you got to listen to his podcast, the Naked Leadership Podcast, available where you get your fine podcasts. Dan, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
TakeNewGround.com
Okay.
or Instagram, Dan_Tocchini, or LinkedIn, Dan Tocchini on LinkedIn. And you can get
And
me at any of
it's
those.
Tocchini.
Yes. One of these
Fantastic.
names.
Yeah, it's spelled just like it sounds.
That's right.
And you were really gracious in a digital giveaway. What is that? What's your giveaway?
I wrote a book called The Change Imperative. It's a
Mm-hmm.
ebook. And I wrote it many years ago when I was at ESPN. We were doing some work and Disney had just bought them and there was a lot of integration work going. And I
Mm,
wrote this pamphlet for them and then I've translated into an ebook. And it's a lot of downloads. In fact, it's opened up a few accounts. It
nice.
basically is a kind of a view of what to expect when you implement change. And
Mm,
it gives you things that you can anchor into and think about because there are things like whenever you make a change, you're going to have about 30 to 40% of the people are going to be in the middle of the road. About
mm,
20 to 30% of the people will resist the change, and about 20% of the people will be all on board. And the game becomes those who don't want to change are going to try to persuade those on the fence to come with them. And
yeah.
you want to change. So your job, that's the audience you want to speak to. Too often, leaders get caught up in trying to roll over what we call the levelers. They're the ones who don't want to change. And you got to know how to identify them and help them out of the organization or getting up to it.
Hmm.
And how you do that needs to be done in a way that persuades those who are on the fence to come over to the change and jump in. Pamphlets about that.
It is chock full of great information. And to get that, just text the word change, CHANGE, to this number, 213-409-8366. 213-409-8366. Text the word change, CHANGE, and you can have access to this really amazing information that's going to help you in your leadership, getting people on board. Dan, thank you for being on for Badass Entrepreneurs Only. I met you through your podcast. I never, in my wildest dreams, when I first started listening to you guys, thought you'd be on my show, and here you are. And so I really honor and appreciate everything that you've shared.
Well, Dan, thanks for having me. I love talking with you. I find you to be stimulating and insightful. So bless you, man. Thank you very much.
To be continued.
Good.
Hey, one last thing. If you're feeling stuck in business life, wherever, Download my book, Jumping the Gap, Kill Your Story and Take Action. In this book, you'll see how the stories that you tell yourself are stopping yourself from living your greatest life. Just text the word GAP, G-A-P, to this number, 213-409-8366. 213-409-8366, and text the word GAP. It's a short read, it's fun, it's easy, and if you hate reading like I do, you can grab the audiobook. It's at that same link. Just text the word GAP, G-A-P, to 213-409-8366. You'll love it. All right, that's it. Go out there and be badass today.